Hello, welcome to the post-game Minnesota Vikings fall to the Cleveland Browns Purple Insider Extra. Matthew Coller here, filling in for Sam Ekstrom today. Paul Hodowanic with me. And Paul, a loss that I feel like we've seen many a time in the Mike Zimmer era. The Vikings give up a lot of rushing yards, which was not expected to be a thing when the season started. But ultimately, what this one came down to is that they could not pass protect for Kirk Cousins. And when we've seen that in the past, we have seen poor performances that do not result in wins. So now the Vikings are 1-3. And I want to ask you, Paul, right off the bat, let's talk about the big picture of this football game. What do we think it means for the rest of the season and for the pressure that is ramped up on everyone here at US Bank Stadium after a loss like this, where they were given opportunities but could not find a way to come through?
Yeah, it feels like they've eliminated themselves from having one of those bad weeks that usually comes in the middle of the season. It seems like they had those two right away, the first two games of the season, and now they've just been scrambling to come back. And I think you mentioning the offensive line is a good point, because I think one of the points why people were confident about it being 1-2 and potentially them turning it around was the way the offensive line was performing there against Seattle a little bit the first two games. You're saying, okay, Oli Udoh, he's kind of looking all right. Ezra Cleveland is doing some good things. Brian O'Neill still doing well, gave up his first pressure today, I believe, but still playing well. And it's, okay, this is one of their biggest issues, and they're kind of solving it. And so maybe that projects them out for this season to kind of get back. And then they got blown up by the Browns. And I mean, it can happen against Jadeveon Clowney and Myles Garrett. That's not maybe an indictment on them, but it wasn't a good performance from them. And it kind of puts you right back to where you were before that Seattle game that says they're not stopping the run very well. Baker Mayfield couldn't really expose a passing defense that I think played all right, but like there were some wide open receivers that he just straight up missed. I think if he was a little bit more accurate, we'd be a little worried about that unit. I think that is a little bit towards the side, but it's still an issue for this team. So yeah, I think we kind of backed up for all the progress we made. We're now backing up, and we put ourselves where it's must win against the Lions. That should always be a must win, but it is defiantly, it is a must win at this point. And it's the Carolina game is now kind of a must win just to get back to 3-3. And they're looking frisky. They played Dallas well today, I believe, or at least came back in that game. And they've won some games to start the season. So it really puts them at a spot where they need to get to that bye week, 3-3. Otherwise, this could go downhill, and it could go downhill quick.
Well, that's right. And talk about the goodwill that was built up from the Seattle game, where it felt like the offensive line had turned a corner, and it felt like the offense in general was ready to drive their success. And then the first drive of this game, the Vikings come out and they just steamroll Cleveland. They shoot down the field, big completions to Justin Jefferson and Adam Thielen, a great touchdown pass to Justin Jefferson from Kirk Cousins. And then the rest of the game, the Vikings just could not effectively move the ball. And the other part of this too, Paul, is after the first week, they talked about, hey, we just have to clean up the key penalties and then we'll be fine. But the key penalties came back today. They committed a holding in the end zone on a fourth down. Now, it might have been a little suspect, but a penalty nonetheless on Eric Kendricks that gave the Browns another chance to score their first touchdown. One of the most bizarre penalties that I've ever seen, Sheldon Richardson calling timeout when the Vikings didn't have one. That gives the Browns an opportunity to then go for two, and they produce a 2-point conversion. There was also a time where Tyler Conklin somehow got matched up on Myles Garrett, and even Justin Jefferson joked after the game, like, understandable that you would end up holding Myles Garrett, but that negated a pass that went for over 30 yards that could have changed the complexion of this game. But once again, it was the penalties. And I think also what we saw, Paul, today is it wasn't just that the defensive line of Cleveland beat the Vikings offensive line in the pass protection and pressured Kirk Cousins. It was also that they couldn't run the football. And anytime we've seen the Vikings really struggle to run the football, the end result just ends up being that they struggle on offense. And I think where the pressure comes in, Paul, is that we've just seen this loss happen too many times. That this isn't a random one. This isn't, well, you know, they didn't get the bounces or that one penalty or that one mistake. It was kind of a well-earned loss, and it's a loss that we've seen in a lot of games that have been hyped up over the last couple of years.
Yeah, I think what frustrates me, and I think what makes this game seem more than just, one loss, it seems more indicative of Zimmer's entire tenure here, is it's micro and macro. It's the small things that are continuing to be the same redundancies that are costing them, like the penalties, like the offensive line play, like your defensive line not playing well. And then it's also you saying, the stats don't tell the story.
Right.
We go off feel, we go off the way it looked. And apparently that was supposed to make it seem better. It didn't feel great in here, even when the crowd was just flustering Baker Mayfield every single chance he got. The offense was equally bad in this game. The offensive line was equally bad in this game. So it's both those really small things that seem to be the same things. You're like, well, they can fix those. And maybe they fix them for a week, but then they pop back up again. And it's those same macro issues where, okay, maybe they fix it for a month. Kirk looks really good for a month, and then he doesn't anymore. And it just feels like we're in this cycle of doing the same thing over and over again. And that's, I think, where it gets frustrating, where it gets tiring, is they haven't solved those issues. And I'd feel a lot better if different issues were popping up and they were kind of putting those fires out, and then new ones were coming up, just like any team faces. But it's these same ones that they just cannot put out time and time again.
Well, and other things, too, that we thought they had fixed, the rushing defense. In the offseason, they put a lot into it, including signing Delvin Tomlinson, bringing back Sheldon Richardson, bringing back Everson Griffin. And today, they got run over for over 180 yards. And Cleveland, though they did not pass the football particularly well, and that was maybe part of the reason Mike Zimmer was saying he wasn't upset about the defensive performance. They only scored 14 points against the Vikings, but still Cleveland was able to hold on to the ball for 35 minutes of this game and keep the Vikings offense off the field, limit the number of chances that the Vikings offense had to come back in the game. So what you're not seeing is a completely fixed defense. And even when they play well, they still show cracks in the foundation. The other thing in terms of cracks in the foundation that we've seen repeatedly over the years from the Vikings is the end of game, looking for that game-winning drive. They had not one, but two shots at it in this game. And in the first one, they started off with several run plays, which was sort of surprising with about 3 minutes left in the game. So they wore time down kind of on themselves. And then they get it back with 1 minute left and a timeout, throw a 3-yard pass to KJ Osborne that wore 20 seconds off the clock, and ultimately they were not able to get into the end zone. Now, these situations are tough to execute, especially when the defense is gearing up to rush the passers and drop everyone back. But it's been a rare occurrence in recent years that we've seen them be able to execute these, and even execute at the end of the half to double dip, as they said, and they did against Seattle. And that's where you talk about when the things that they did well against Seattle seem to disappear the very next day. So now you talk about what is up next. You have a game against Detroit. Detroit's not very good. Carolina, as you said, they lost to the Dallas Cowboys today. But after that, you have a very difficult schedule. And now it becomes the razor's edge for this team. And I thought it was very interesting, the messaging from Mike Zimmer after the game, where he said, I think I have a very good team. I know what I'm talking about. And Kevin Stefanski even told me that I have a very good team. Well, I do think that they have a good roster, Paul. I totally agree with that. But I also think that Mike Zimmer's mentor, Bill Parcells, said that you are what your record is. And now you're at 1-3. The pressure is on. Mike Zimmer is trying to sell, give me more time. And if they can get to 3-3 at the bye week, I think that will cool things off for the potential for an exciting second half of the season that will have its roller coaster moments and that they could potentially get into the playoffs. But there is now no margin for error over the next two games because the Vikings, and the way I look at it, Paul, is let this one slip away where there were chances to win it and they just didn't come through.
Yeah, and them being at 1-3 now, it really gives them no opportunity to have those slip-ups at any point.
Can't miss another field goal at the end of the game. You can't have a fumble. You can't. That's the thing about the NFL, Paul, is that we see bad teams win against good teams all the time. Detroit almost beat the Ravens 2 weeks ago because it's the NFL and there are bounces like that. But now, like you said, I mean, there's just no room for error.
Yeah, and it just, like Kevin Stefanski even tried to give them this game at several times, and good teams take advantage when coaches make dumb decisions. I think we both think Kevin Stefanski is a really good coach.
Yeah.
But him inexplicably throwing several times, they should have even had that last drive to give it to have a chance to win.
Yep.
The last drive should have been the time when they ran three of the first plays they ran and then decided to throw a bomb to Justin Jefferson, or I think, yeah. And so it's these same things that pop up, and I feel like we're talking in circles, but this team is spinning their wheels. Yeah. And so this sounds repetitive because it is repetitive, and something needs to change if they're gonna get back to being a really good team.
Well, when they talk about after a win, you're never as good as you looked. And after a loss, you're never as bad as you looked. But if they have too many more of those, you're never as bad as you looked, it sort of becomes who you are. And you are not just the team of bad breaks anymore after you sort of earn your bad breaks to get to 1-3. So that's where the Vikings are at now. All of a sudden, a game against Detroit that maybe we all just wrote in a little W next to when we looked at the schedule when it came out. Now that becomes a lot of pressure on Mike Zimmer, Kirk Cousins, and the like here in downtown Minneapolis. So Paul Hodowanic, Matthew Coller. Make sure you check out our longer post-game conversation wherever you get your podcast, Purple Insider Podcast, and our write-ups from the locker room and from the game, My Instant Reaction at purpleinsider.substack.com. And we will catch you next time.